Hey everyone, this lecture is on Act Utilitarianism, and Act Utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory and is a type of utilitarianism. Well, when we thought about and discussed consequentialism, which is kind of the broader scope of theories, we talked about ethical egoism and also utilitarianism. And what I wanted to highlight again is that a consequentialist theory will have two parts. One, a general theory of rightness. An action is right insofar as it promotes the greatest good or the greatest utility. And a theory of value, because you have to define what goodness is or utility is. And that's a theory of what makes something good. Now, there are two types. We talked about ethical egoism, that's prejudicial and where it's only about or promotes the greatest good for the individual. Whereas utilitarianism is altruistic or impartial, so it wants the good for everyone. So what about Act Utilitarianism in particular? So Act Utilitarianism asserts that the morally right act for any particular situation is the act that would produce the greatest overall utility. Now, what it is, it's an impartial consequentialist theory, and so it takes everyone into account, even oneself, right? And the overall effects, that's what it's concerned with. It addresses the morality of specific acts in specific circumstances, right? So what that means is that whenever I'm in a particular situation or any situation, an Act Utilitarianism, utilitarian will ask that question, what would produce the greatest overall utility? And that's the right thing to do. Act Utilitarianism is intended to explain what makes an act morally right or wrong. So it tells us, it informs us what produces the best consequences for the best utility. And that would explain why that action is right. And Act Utilitarianism considers all individuals, not just oneself. So it may be the case that for the whole group, right, or the overall consequences, you may have to sacrifice something, right? Okay. Assessing the consequences. So when we think about consequences, what do we look for? One is the scope. And the scope includes all those affected by the act, right? So it's not just, for me, this lecture affects everyone who listens to it, all my students, either directly or indirectly, right? Duration considers the length of time of each effect, right? How long will it take? Or if I do this, how much pain will that person endure? Or how less, right? Intensity, consider the force or the strength of each resulting experience, right? There are degrees of pain, there's a degree of goodness or pleasure or utility, right? Probability considers how likely each effect might be, given that we don't know ahead of time which of the many possible breaks will actually occur. So we have to work with probability because we don't know the future. So we're not thinking about, that's possible that because I ate this candy bar that there's going to be world peace, right? Well, is that really probable? Is that likely? No, right? You want a more concrete causal connection there. Okay, procedure for assessing the morality of an act. So what do? We first have to identify the various choices. Do I do Act A, Act B, Act C? And for each choice, A, B, or C, you determine the expected overall utility value. So what will A, B, or C, actions A, B, or C, what would they produce? Right? And you're thinking about scope, duration, intensity, and probability. And then you subtract the disutility, because every action is not always positive. There, I may, for example, if I quit smoking, which I did, a few years ago. Now it's great because the people around me don't have secondhand smoke. My health gets better. I save money. Now, it doesn't help the local liquor store where I bought my cigarettes because they're not making as much money. So that might be a disutility. However, I'm subtracting the utility, all the overall benefits minus the negative benefits, or a little less business for my neighbor. However, overall, it's good. Okay, so quitting smoking is the right thing to do. Okay, comparing the expected overall utility values of each choice. So look at A, B, or C, right? And the choice that yields the greatest expected overall utility is the right act. So that's usually how you would kind of think through Act Utilitarianism. Okay, so when we're thinking about Act Utilitarianism, put Act UT as for short. Why would you be an Act Utilitarian? What are some things going for it? Well, one is the objectivity, right? It's not subjective. So Act Utilitarian gives us a single answer to moral questions, right? Now, if two people disagree, it's probably a disagreement about the facts, not disagreement about the procedure, right? Or a disagreement that it's objective. So you and I, if we're both Act Utilitarian, we may disagree like what the actual consequences are because we don't know the future. However, we would not disagree that there is an answer to it. So that's why there's something objective. Impartiality. That is, it doesn't favor one group or another, right? It treats all individuals equally. Simplicity. An Act Utilitarian explains all the morality with one simple principle, and that is greatest good for the greatest number, or greatest utility for the greatest number, right? This principle is highly intuitive, and it views consequences as relevant to morality, and it acknowledges that we all seek desirable experiences rather than undesirable. So when we think about, it's not super complicated, right? We think about what's the best consequence, and it tells us what it is, and we do it, right? And we want something that helps everyone. So these are some good things going for it, and there are a few more. Flexibility. The rightness of a particular kind of act depends on the circumstances, right? So what do I mean by flexibility, or what is the authors of our textbook? So let's say we have a rule, right? Like, something that's always wrong. It's always wrong to lie, right? At that point, like, what if, some terrorists are coming and at your door, and you're, hiding, people from them, right? Nazis, you're hiding Jews in the attic, and Nazis come, and you're like, and they say, are you housing any Jews? And you say, what's the right thing to do? Well, if you go by a rule that can't change, and that's not flexible, then you got to tell the truth. What's the right thing to do? You tell the truth. Well, obviously, Act Utilitarianism is flexible, because in that particular situation, what produces the greatest good is to lie. So I lie, right? But note that this flexibility has nothing to do with relativism, right? It's not saying that everyone's right. Just saying in any particular circumstance, there's going to be a right answer about what action produces the greatest consequences and best utility, right? And based on that, there's flexibility, right? Because each circumstance is going to be different, right? Okay. And Act Utilitarianism extends morality to non-human animals, since animals can also have desirable or undesirable experiences. So certain, maybe plants don't, but maybe certain kinds of animals that can feel pain, that's disutility. So you may include that in your calculation of what is the right thing to do. Okay. All right. So let's go with some problems. One is the calculation problem. And I say problems, I mean difficulties or worries, because there are Act Utilitarians still. Utilitarian is a live view, and people will talk about these difficulties and have answers to them, or that mitigate what seemed to be an unsolvable problem. But here's one problem: the calculation problem. And it's difficult to accurately predict and evaluate all possible consequences of scope, intensity, duration, probability. And that's right. Right? It's very difficult at times. Some things are easy. Some things are really difficult. But you have to act. Right? Okay. The moral saints problem. I'm sticking with the way that the textbook has said it, but think of it more as an over-demanding problem. Right? That is, Act Utilitarianism is really demanding, because what happens is that it requires us to make the best choice out of all the possible alternatives, even in mundane ones. So when I'm thinking about even this lecture right now, right, I have to think about what's the right thing to do, right? Even what should I wear? What will produce the greatest utility, right? That seems really like demanding for every single thing we do, right? So this makes good choices morally wrong simply because they are not our best choices, right? So, maybe doing this lecture and being a teacher is a great thing, but maybe I could have been something else, right, as a vocation that could have produced more good in the world, right? I'm actually doing something not good or not as good, right? And so what is this problem, the moral Satan's problem or the over-demanding problem? It's a problem of moral confirmation. That is, what seems morally right to us, right, or morally permissible or acceptable, would be wrong in some cases, right? That is, it doesn't matter what I should wear today, but utilitarianism, Act Utilitarianism, may say that there is a right answer to it because it's going to produce the consequences, the best utility. And what if I don't want to wear red, and let's say wearing red in Wisconsin would produce the greatest amount of utility? That doesn't matter. I didn't do the best, right? So it seems to require us to do more than what moral duty normally seems to require. So that seems to be a problem moral. Is this unsolvable? No, but it is a worry. Okay. Another couple. One is more the moral permissiveness objection, and that's Act Utilitarianism can approve any sort of action, breaking promises, assassinations, torture, whatever, because of the greater good, right? So, if you think hard about it, our government, economics, how we, they have all these numbers and stuff, torture, like these things. How do they get themselves to say that it's warranted, right? It's permissible, because they think that it would produce the greatest consequences. In some cases, maybe, right? What if, this person has a terrorist has a bomb that's going to go, and kill thousands of people, but torturing them would get at the answer. Maybe is that permissible? How far do we go, right? Well, what about something a little lighter, right? Breaking promises, right? Lying. The thing is, any sort of action that produces even just one little bit of better consequences would make it better. Okay, so that's it's not a knockdown objection, but it does seem to again go with this moral confirmation idea, right? It's hard for us to justify certain kinds of gross actions, like killing someone, in order for the greater good, right? I mean, would you kill your mom to save 3 strangers, right? That seems very difficult, but that would be the right thing to do according to Act Utilitarianism. Okay, if the situation was such that that was the case. Okay, now this next one is a biggie, right? And this is the justice human rights objection. So Act Utilitarianism, because it's always thinking about the greater good, it could actually obligate us to violate a person's rights or commit serious injustices. Because what it's going after is the greater good. So what happens to the minority, right? It's going after overall utility. So sometimes it's going to sacrifice the well-being of an individual or a minority so that the majority would benefit. And if we know anything about our history or even what's going on now, you can't disenfranchise, take away the civil rights of minorities, right? For what would seem like an overall good. That seems wrong, right? So Act Utilitarianism, though, by the structure of it, because it's promoting the overall utility, may say that the right thing to do is actually what seems wrong to us, right? Here's another objection about the well-being, sacrificing the well-being of an individual. And this is not in the book. This is just my example of chop up Chuck. Let's say Chuck is just, a college student, 22 years old, is playing basketball and sprained his ankle, goes to the, emergency room, and, just wants to double check if he got his ankle, sprained or it was broken, if he needs a cast or anything like that. And he goes in, and what happens is that there are 5 other people in the hospital as well who need organ transplants, right? I mean, and it turns out that Chuck is an exact match for these 5 people. Like, let's say one person needs a, heart transplant, and they are, 1 year away from discovering a cure for some form of cancer. Let's say the other person is, some sort of astrophysicist and is on the verge of discovering, some, great discovery about the universe. And let's say the other is, some sort of biology person who's about to discover the next kind of sustainable food. And let's say the next is, you get my point, right? That is, saving these 5 people would bring about overall utility, right? However, it would have to sacrifice Chuck, right? So what would be the right thing to do according to Act Utilitarianism? Well, we chop up Chuck, right? That we chop him up, distribute his organs to the people who would need it. However, that seems wrong, right? Or that is wrong. That's a serious injustice, and it violates a person's rights. Therefore, what does that mean? That means that this is a big problem for Act Utilitarianism, right? Because they have to fix this, because that is clearly wrong. All right, well, do we really have time, another kind of practical problem, to calculate overall utility for every action that we act upon? Think about it. I mean, a lot of times we're thinking, do we, you're about to act on something, do we even have pull out our phones, and is there an app where it calculates the consequences of, do we have time for that kind of thing? Sometimes we just have to act, right? And it would be a lot easier if there was a rule to follow, right? So with this problem of Act Utilitarianism, or these problems, there have been, a new kind of utilitarianism called rule utilitarianism that we'll get to in the next lecture. All right, I'll see you online. Bye.